Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Monday, June 4th, 2018. Monday's the big day. Monday's when we go over the most information, at least until something forms that we need to really talk about. A hurricane threatening landfall is a good example of that. But usually Mondays are the day where we go over the most information to kind of set the tone for the week ahead. And with that, let's get started. The Southern Oscillation Index tells us a lot about the pressure pattern in the deep tropics, and as of late, a little bit negative recently. You can see that we had this really impressive climb lately after an equally impressive fall, but now the 30 and the 90-day are trying to sort of meet in the middle and maybe reach some kind of an accord, to level things out. But the bottom line, the 30-day is +4. +2, the 90-day is +4, and until this goes negative, substantially so, the threat of a significant El Nino event is typically not there. This is just one of the parameters that we watch, and the more steady the Southern Oscillation Index is, one way or the other, then the less of a chance of something extreme happening, either La Nina or El Nino. All right? So let's get rid of this tab. We no longer need it. We got a lot to cover. So all that being said, today's update, June the 4th, of the NOAA-NESDIS sea surface temperature anomalies map. There are a few islands out here of warmth that have shown up in the tropical Pacific, but no major overall warming of the INSO region. Basically, everything's right around neutral to slightly warmer than neutral, but certainly warmer than the peak of last year's hurricane season. So yeah, it's a different season for sure this year. Things are, well, they're always going to be different, but it's pretty much, I would say it's vastly different this year. So we have this warmer overall Pacific than we had last year, but again, we're not reaching the what we call the Nino levels. El Nino is typically ½ degree Celsius or higher, and we're just not seeing that quite yet. Meanwhile, in the tropical Atlantic, just a slight moderation through here of the very cold relative to average main development region. Otherwise, this very strong high pressure that's been sitting out here, continuing to blast the trade winds westward, and that's also sending these bouts of strong Saharan air, these African dust outbreaks, and that does filter out the sunlight. All right, so that's going to help to cool things off as well relative to average. I got to remember that. When you see blue, don't think cold. It's just an anomaly. It's a departure from normal. Everything on this side of the scale is below the long-term average, and everything on the right-hand side is above the long-term average. Okie dokes? All right. So in the central subtropical Atlantic out here, much warmer than average, and even right up against the coast, water temps have really spiked in recent days, and most of the Gulf of Mexico also seemingly running above the long-term average, but nothing alarming, no big deal, nothing to worry about. We just watch this and see how things evolve. I think the biggest driver is this area right through here in terms of your long track intense hurricanes that get started in the deep tropics like we saw last year. So if we don't, again, I'm going to reiterate this, if we don't have this as being favorable, maybe all of this is later on. All right? Something to keep an eye on. This part of the hurricane season into July, and a good deal of August, is usually pretty dead. So if we don't have a lot to talk about over the coming weeks, that's why. It's not necessarily because, the season's really not going to produce anything. All right? So looking at the subsurface in the INSO regions, this is interesting too. Let's see, what do we got here? Blue still? Yeah. All right. So here's the warmth that has reached the surface. And then you've got this large area that just refuses to give. And this has whittled away just a little bit. Basically just following this over the last few weeks, we're seeing a push of this warm pool to the east as somewhat more westerly winds try to take over in the tropical Pacific. Normally your trade winds would blow from east to west across the surface like this, and this is an oversimplification of it, but when those winds reverse or slow down, then these warm pools that form, especially in the West Pac, can migrate eastward, and then they run into South America, or the trade winds just allow that warm subsurface pool to surface, and you get a warming event. But look, there's even a little tiny area of colder anomalies way, way, way out in the western Pacific. The area that we're most interested in is really right through here, something like that, all right? And it's a little bit warmer than it should be, but the really strong anomalies are still quite a bit below the surface, and there's really nothing else developing back out here to the west to resupply the warm pool. So at best, in terms of what I would say an ENSO event or a warm El Nino event, well, an El Nino is warm. What we really refer to as a warm ENSO, El Nino, Southern Oscillation, weak El Nino conditions, maybe by winter. That would make the most sense. Probably not enough to impact the hurricane season in the Atlantic. We've talked about that ad nauseum. Maybe we should stop or just address it once per month. All right, so moving on along, actual sea surface temperatures across the Atlantic. And this is what I was telling you. So off the coast of Africa and out across the main development region here for several hundred miles, water temperatures are in the mid to upper 70s Fahrenheit. And 20 degrees Celsius, that's about 68 Fahrenheit. So yeah, I guess you could say it's cool, but we're not talking about when you see those blues. In this case, blue is cold up there, but it should be. It's in the North Atlantic, for goodness sakes. But down here, you can bet when we get to September, this water temperature pattern through here, the water will be warm enough for hurricanes. How much relative to average will it be warmer or colder? And we'll see how much that matters as we go on through time, because if we have a robust tropical wave train, you just never know. These are all things that we can monitor when the time comes. It's still just a little too early to do that. Usually we see the intertropical convergence zone. That's the area that goes across the globe where the trade winds from the northern and southern hemispheres meet. That migrates north over time, and by the time we get to late July into August, we can start focusing on what the health and frequency of African easterly waves is, and deduce some things from there. Alrighty? So looking at the Gulf of Mexico, nice and warm, except for the eastern Gulf. I mean, it's warm. This color here, I don't want to call it Carolina blue, but I guess it is. What is that? That's 26 Celsius. Let me go back out. And, or is that 27? Yeah, I think it's 27. So the whole Gulf of Mexico is 80 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, except for just a couple of patches here and there. This is typically colder because you get this upwelling off the coast of the northern Yucatan, off of Merida. But the rest of the Gulf, plenty warm. It always will be, and you just have to wait and see. Does a hurricane come along to take advantage of it? Now, Alberto was different. It came in along the east side over here when things were cooler, and then made landfall up through there. But it wasn't quite hurricane season yet, so it was early. It was early to the party, so to speak. Off the East Coast, now this is great. I love it. Kids love it. Water temperatures along the coast, the Pamlico Sound, all the way down through the low country, Charleston, Tybee Island, Savannah, that region, upper 70s to low 80s in some cases, and even a little bit more to the north up here. You know, it's warming up just a little bit, so that's good. Moving on along, I was just looking at my phone, making sure, because I got to use it for something in just a minute. The Madden-Julian Oscillation. All right, now why are things going to be quiet? Well, normally, climatologically, June and July are quiet, but Madden-Julian Oscillation tells us a lot about the upward motion. And think about it, in nature, there are periods of fertility amongst all living things, it seems. And even though the atmosphere is not alive like we are and other animals, there are different times when things are conducive and things are not. And it is a fluid and dynamic atmosphere. It's sort of the living atmosphere, if you will. And while we can get hurricanes to develop in a non-favorable Madden-Julian oscillation, and that's typically when we see it pass through phases 8, 1, and 2, this is when it's more favorable. Let's put it that way. So right now, the Madden-Julian oscillation is over here in phases 5 and 6, roughly, and that's not favorable for Atlantic development. That's more out in the Pacific, towards the maritime continent region, way, way out, far away from the Atlantic basin, put it that way. It does not favor upward motion where the air is rising and able to spread out, diffluent. Not happening right now. It's not in these phases, okay? We're locked over here, according to the GFS and its ensembles anyway. And the European shows similar. Always going to have some differences, but just it's not favorable right now for the Atlantic basin or the Western Hemisphere as a whole. Interestingly, though, that being said, there is this one feature right here. Sometimes you can get these what are called convectively coupled Kelvin waves, separate from the Madden-Julian oscillation. It's maddening, isn't it? It is, and I'm not trying to be funny with that pun. There's a lot to keep up with, and the point is, hurricanes don't just pop up out of nowhere. You have to have pre-existing conditions, light shear, moist atmosphere, warm sea surface temperatures, so forth and so on. And even though all that can be there, you don't get hurricanes forming just out of nowhere. Tropical wave usually is the trigger, or this monsoon trough, a lot of different features. And so even though the Madden-Julian oscillation is not currently in this area of the world, it's way over here around this side. Look, right here in the East Pac, south of Mexico, something is going to develop later this week. You also notice on this particular view all this African dust coming off, and that will continue to keep the main development region cooler than average. So if we go and we look at the Hurricane Center site, yeah, there's a 60% chance in the short term, 90% chance, so almost a certainty in the longer term for this system to develop. This is a close-up of what it looks like. Large disorganized area of disturbed weather kind of along this monsoon trough, this convergence area along the Pacific, where something kind of like a grapevine will try to congeal off of that and grow like a grape, right? And, oh wow, even, I guess this just popped up. Maybe another area after that. So the East Pac's going to get busy, and typically when this is busy, put a check mark here. You can put a minus over here because that usually spells inactivity for the Atlantic side. Remember last year, once the activity was just one after the other, died down in the Pacific, the Atlantic got active. So usually the Pacific goes first, expends its energy, and then the Atlantic basin becomes conditionally favorable unless it's overwhelmed by a very warm ENSO event, which is what we watch here. So that's where this all gets connected. So as time progresses and this part of the Eastern Pacific gets active, we watch this to see how much it warms or doesn't, and then watch all this over through here. And by that time, it's August, and we see where we stand. And that's how you make the deduction of what would happen for the rest of the season. I think it makes sense. We're getting closer at figuring this stuff out more so than we ever have before. So looking at the disturbance, this is the coast of Mexico right here. There's your Baja Peninsula. Good old Southern California all the way up to the west coast. Our good friends in Hawaii dealing with the volcano out there, circled in blue there. Our disturbance is right here. This is hour 0 of the 12Z GFS. So let's move the toolbar, shall we? Come on, toolbar. It's being very slow. Start it up. So there we go. Watch over here. Over the next few days, it finally comes together, that vorticity signature. Nice and round. It's not sheared. It's not oblong and weird looking. It's compact. A lot of energy being conserved around that middle. The conservation of angular momentum. When a skater pulls their arms in tighter, they spin faster. And there you go. So probably the season's first tropical storm. I think that's a shoe-in. And then eventually this may become the first hurricane of the Eastern Pacific. That being said, no direct impacts to land, as you can see. Stays far enough away. There's sufficient mid-level and probably even deep-level ridging out here. That's why it's so hot and nasty out in the desert southwest. Well, it's beautiful out there, but the weather, it's too hot for me, put it that way. I love it, though, I'll admit. Maybe we get to go out there in July. We'll talk about that another time. But this moves on west to west-northwest, no problems. And then another system starts to take shape there right at the end of day 5. So, you folks in Mexico, just, it's hurricane season. So pay attention. these videos on YouTube, anybody in the world can watch them. Well, most anybody. So heads up, just watch and pay attention if you're down there along the coast of Mexico. All right? Everything else should stay nice and quiet. So, Monday, I'm going to have a new feature called the Monday Mailbag, especially when things are nice and quiet. Emails that have come in the last couple of months, I've got a few that have been sitting there, or if people want to email with a question. My email, I should have had a slide, I'll do that next time. It's easy, it's Hurmark, Hurrmark, first four letters of hurricane, Hurrmark @gmail.com. And I can't read every email, we'll be here all day, but I'm going to read some, and eventually we'll get to all of them, hopefully. At least that's my intention. So this one is from Michael Thibodeau in the New Orleans area, southern Louisiana native, and he asked a very good question. How do you decide which systems to cover? The logistics in deciding where to put the cameras and where to establish your home base. Talking about for landfalls, the best way to describe that is once the center line, how they say, don't follow the skinny black line, and where the center is supposed to go. Well, that's exactly what I have to do, and anybody that's going to help me, we have to do together. So we determine where we think the landfall will be, how far away it is, how soon we can get there, what equipment we need, and that all depends on the intensity and the expected impact, the logistics of the area, whether we're driving and in some case flying. The short answer, it's very complicated, but sometimes it's not. When I went down for Alberto, that was fairly straightforward. I brought 4 cameras, no weather station because I was not sure that it would be a hurricane. It might, but I thought, we're just going to focus on the cameras this time. Plus, that part of the Florida coast is difficult to put equipment up, the anemometers. I'm working on all that. That's part of the logistics. And I knew that I was generally going to be by myself. We did have Brandon that came over from Pensacola that helped some, and that makes it more fun. You can kind of make the hours go by. So it just depends, Michael, on where it is, how strong, the population area. Like New Jersey is different, obviously, than South Florida. With Irma, that was a huge challenge because of all the population. So there's no easy playbook. It's a lot of paying attention, a lot of talking to my colleagues, and a lot of sleepless nights, and then bam, we go. Try not to ever be behind the 8 ball. That's a big rule. Leave as early as possible so we can get sleep. Rest is our biggest ally, I kid you not. Now, Michael asked another question, and I want to address it as well. Basically, what sites could I recommend, or Twitter feeds, or Twitter handles from people, etc.? You hear me talk about Levi Cowan, Tropical Tidbits, a lot, and I think that goes without saying. But I also really love Storm 2K. Been a member here myself for a long, long time, probably since the late 90s when it was Go PBI. It was Palm Beach Interactive. And this is just made up of a great group of people. I like their forum here, the Talkin' Tropics, where it's just kind of a, anything goes. Well, obviously, you check religion and politics at the door. But other than that, they talk tropics. Come on, Arrow. And I just love it. There's no trolls, and if you are, they boot you. And you get professional meteorologists, some of them disguised as another screen name, which is fine. I love it. This is one of my favorite sites because you get a consensus of what people are thinking. That group crowdsourced education process. I love that. So Storm 2K is a big one for me. On Twitter, I like following, let me go to my Twitter page, Ben Knoll. He's from New Zealand, and he's really, really good with the long-range stuff. Joe Bastardi, good at the long-range stuff. Personally, I wish he would drop the political aspect of the weather, but that's just my opinion. Hey, he has the right to do it. His long-range stuff is great. Michael Lowry, who used to be at the Weather Channel, he's awesome. I should have pulled all these handles up. But it just depends on what's happening. To get information from people, Eric Weber is awesome from NC State. He's going to graduate, I think, this year. So just go through my Twitter, see who I'm following, and that'll give you a good idea of, it was 142. Some of them are just more media folks. I like to see what they're saying in their part of the world, etc. But it just depends, and it's a great question. Michael Ventris at WSI oftentimes has useful information, but he can miss sometimes just like anybody can. There's Joe. Brian McNulty, I really like him for the tracking and sort of the insight from the institutional point of view, the education side. He works down at, University of Miami, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, University of Miami. And there's just a lot, but there's a handful that I rely on the most. And I think over time you'll see me mention them, and you'll kind of pick up on that. So that's a great question. I appreciate it. Again, if you have questions for a future Monday mailbag, and honestly, let me spare you. What do you think the rest of the hurricane season is going to be like? That's, I don't know. I'll go ahead and tell you the answer. Something, more ask me, kind of like an ask me anything, except seasonal stuff. Unless it's something specific that I could address, like why is the main development region colder than average? What are the driving factors? And maybe I can develop, especially in these boring time periods, a more thorough answer with graphics and slides. All right? But just, do you think a hurricane's going to hit my house in August? Don't ask me that because I don't know. And believe me, if I knew, I would tell you. Hey, real quick, I am just blown away at the success here of this Patreon. I signed up for it a year or two ago, and it kind of trickled. But in recent weeks, it has really surged, and that outpouring is just amazing to me. And we're already making a difference. Let me just tell you real quick, because of the pledges that have come in just the last 2 weeks alone, I went ahead and decided, if you remember after last season, we're going to have a live aspect to what we do. We're always going to have that. But we know that the terrestrial network can go down, and we can't feed a live stream. Sometimes it happened during Irma. We lost 3 out of the 4. I wanted a backup system, and there's a lot of different ideas, wildlife cameras and time-lapse cameras and whatever. And I simply modified a GoPro Hero 4 immediately after Irma and before Nate, figured out how to make it run off of an external battery for 3 days, and put a 256 gigabyte chip in it, and voila, I can get 26 hours of HD video, or 96 hours and almost 100,000 high-resolution still images if I want to do a time-lapse mode. It just depends on the length of time I need it out there. So, what I'm getting at, because of the recent pledges, I want to have 8 of them when it's all said and done. I was able to just purchase number 4. Yay, I need a soundboard button because of the pledges from you guys. That is funded 100% by people on Patreon. It's not coming out of my pocket where I can't, sorry kids, can't feed you this week. I'm buying a GoPro instead. Of course, it would never be like that, but you get the point. It was crowdfunded, and when I bought that off of B&H Photo, I can't tell you how proud I was. It was so uplifting, and I know it sounds cheesy, but to know that people are supporting what I want to do, and then I can expand, and I've talked about getting a staff eventually. We got to get there. It's going to take a year or two, but you guys have done it. You've already made a difference. I'm going to talk about some upcoming ideas of things I want to do this summer because of the Patreon support. That'll happen probably next Monday. We can't cover everything today. There will be, nothing to talk about next week. That being said, I'm finished, all right? I told you it was going to be lengthy, but we covered a lot. And as you can tell, I enjoy this, and I think it's interesting, and I'm glad to be able to share it with you in this amazing world that we call the Internet. All right, have a great rest of your Monday afternoon. I am Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks as always for tuning in. I will be back the rest of the week with shorter updates as we just watch what's going on in the tropics.